The great chamber stretched out in every direction like a small universe. Floating platforms held representatives from thousands of alien species. Some were tall and thin like living shadows. Others were masses of tentacles or clouds of glowing gas held together by invisible force fields. Crystals that thought and spoke hovered beside creatures made of pure energy. This was the Galactic Conclave, the oldest and most powerful alliance in the known universe. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the small human platform at the very center of the chamber. She was alone. Behind her, visible through the transparent walls of the station, Earth hung in the darkness of space, blue and green and white. It looked so small from here, so fragile. Elena was 53 years old. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple style, and she wore the formal gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Her hands were steady at her sides, but inside her chest, her heart was beating fast. She had known this moment was coming. They all had known. But knowing something and living through it were very different things. The voice of the chief arbiter filled the chamber. The arbiter was a Vethkari, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Its body was humanoid but wrong in ways that made Elena's eyes hurt if she looked too long. Its skin shifted colors constantly, and its face had no features except for a wide mouth filled with teeth that were too perfect, too white. The Tribunal of Elders has reviewed all evidence, the arbiter announced. Its voice was calm and cold, like wind blowing across ice. We have studied humanity for 112 of their years. We have observed their history. We have analyzed their biology. We have measured their psychology. Our conclusion is final and cannot be challenged. Elena said nothing. She had been told she would not be allowed to speak in her own defense. The conclave had decided humanity's fate before she had even arrived at this station. This was not a trial. It was a performance. Humanity is classified as a Category 7 existential threat, the arbiter continued. Their genetic structure is dangerously unstable. Their psychology is aggressive, territorial, and unpredictable. Their rate of reproduction and expansion exceeds all acceptable limits. If allowed to continue growing among the civilized species of this galaxy, they will inevitably cause catastrophic harm. Around the chamber, thousands of aliens nodded or made gestures of agreement. Elena saw fear in their eyes. Fear of her. Fear of the billions of humans living on Earth and the 17 colony worlds. Fear of a species that had only discovered faster than light travel 60 years ago. She wanted to laugh. 60 years. That was nothing compared to the Vethkari, who had ruled the stars for 3 million years. Or the Ordassian Collective, living crystals who claimed to remember the birth of the first suns. Humanity was a baby compared to these ancient powers. But still, they were afraid. The sentence is as follows, the arbiter said. All human colonies will be evacuated. The population will be returned to their homeworld. All faster-than-light technology will be confiscated. Earth will be surrounded by a network of automated sentinel stations. Any human vessel that crosses the boundary will be destroyed. This quarantine will remain in effect until the tribunal determines that humanity no longer poses a threat. Elena heard the words, but she was watching something else. Across the chamber, floating on a platform of dark metal, was the Vethkari High Commander. His name was Corvathan, and he was the one who had pushed hardest for humanity's exile. Elena had met him once, 2 years ago, at a diplomatic function. He had smiled at her with that too-perfect mouth and told her that humans were interesting creatures. The way he said it made her feel like a bug being examined under glass. Now, Corvathan was smiling again. He thought he had won. He had no idea how wrong he was. Elena cleared her throat. The chamber fell silent. She was not supposed to speak, but no one moved to stop her. I accept the judgment of the tribunal, she said. Her voice was steady and clear. On behalf of Earth and all human colonies, I accept exile. We will go quietly. We will not resist. Corvathan's smile flickered. This was not what he had expected. He had wanted her to beg. He had wanted her to threaten. He had wanted a reason to order the human colonies destroyed instead of merely evacuated. We ask only one thing, Elena continued. Let us say goodbye to our colonies properly. Give us 6 months to complete the evacuation. Allow us to leave with dignity. The arbiter consulted with the other tribunal members. After a moment, it nodded. This request is reasonable. You have 6 of your Earth months to complete the evacuation. After that time, the Sentinel network will be activated. Any humans remaining outside the boundary will be killed. Elena bowed her head. Thank you for your mercy. She turned and walked back to the small shuttle that had brought her to the station. Behind her, the aliens were already celebrating. They thought the threat had been contained. They thought they were safe. As Elena stepped onto her shuttle, she allowed herself a small smile. It was exactly the same smile she had seen on Admiral Chen Wei-Lin's face 3 days ago, when the Admiral had given her final instructions. Let them think they've won, the Admiral had said. Let them believe we're broken. They'll stop watching us closely. They'll get comfortable. And that's when we'll start building. The shuttle's door closed behind Elena. Through the window, she watched the great station growing smaller as her pilot took her away. Inside that station, 4,000 alien species were toasting their victory over humanity. They had no idea what they had just started. 6 months later, the last human ship crossed the boundary into Sol space. The Sentinel network activated behind them. 300 automated stations surrounded the solar system, each one armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy a planet. Any ship that tried to leave would be vaporized in seconds. On Earth, 8 billion people watched the stars disappear behind a wall of invisible death. Many cried. Many raged against the unfairness of it all. But beneath the surface, in places no alien satellite could see, something else was happening. In a bunker 2 miles beneath the Swiss Alps, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood before a room full of the most brilliant minds on Earth. Scientists, engineers, military leaders, philosophers, and artists had all been brought together for this moment. They represented every nation, every culture, every belief system on the planet. For 60 years, we have walked among the stars, the Admiral said. We have seen wonders beyond imagination. We have met species that have existed for millions of years, and we have learned one very important lesson. She paused, looking at each face in the room. We learned that the galaxy is ruled by fear. The Conclave does not protect its members. It controls them. Any species that grows too strong, too fast, or too different is crushed. The Vethkari have done this hundreds of times before. They did it to the Lirani, a peaceful trading species who committed the crime of being too successful at commerce. They did it to the Korthan, a race of explorers who discovered technologies the Vethkari wanted to keep secret. And now they have done it to us. The Admiral activated a holographic display. It showed Earth, surrounded by the red dots of the Sentinel stations. They think this cage will hold us, she said. They think we will fade away, forgotten and irrelevant. But they have made a terrible mistake. They have given us the one thing we needed most. She smiled, and there was something fierce in her eyes. They have given us a reason to unite. For all of human history, we have fought each other. Nations against nations, religions against religions, rich against poor. But now, for the first time, we have a common enemy. Every human being on this planet has been told that they are inferior, that they are dangerous, that they do not deserve to walk among the stars. Her voice rose, filling the bunker. They have insulted us, all 8 billion of us, and that insult will be the foundation of something they cannot imagine. Today, we begin Project Prometheus, not a project for one nation or one government, a project for all of humanity. We will build in secret. We will grow in the shadows. And when we are ready, we will show the galaxy what happens when you try to cage the human spirit. In the months that followed, the world changed in ways that would have seemed impossible just a year before. Borders between countries began to blur. The old rivalries between East and West, North and South, started to fade. When you have been told that your entire species is worthless, the differences between nations seem very small indeed. The United Nations was dissolved and replaced with the Unified Earth Council. Every government on the planet contributed resources, people, and knowledge to the great project. For the first time in history, scientific discoveries were shared freely, instead of being hoarded for profit or military advantage. Patents became meaningless. Corporate secrets were open to all. The only thing that mattered was moving forward. Together, the aliens had made another mistake. They thought humans were dangerous because of their aggression. But human aggression was nothing compared to human cooperation. When 8 billion people decided to work together, they could accomplish things that no alien species had ever dreamed of. Construction began on a massive scale, but all of it was hidden. Deep underground, in tunnels and bunkers that stretched for hundreds of miles, Factories came to life. The ocean floors became shipyards, protected from observation by miles of water. The dark side of the moon was hollowed out and converted into a research facility. Everything was designed to be invisible to the alien satellites that constantly watched Earth from beyond the Sentinel line. The work was hard. Many people had to give up their old lives completely. Families were separated. Dreams were put on hold. But no one complained. They all understood what was at stake. Elena Vasquez returned to Earth as a hero. The woman who had accepted humanity's exile with grace and dignity became a symbol of what humans could be at their best. She was offered leadership positions, but she refused them all. Instead, she asked to work as a simple teacher, helping to train the next generation of diplomats who would one day speak for humanity among the stars. "We will return," she told her students. "Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not in yours, but someday, humans will walk among the stars again. And when that day comes, we must be ready, not just with ships and weapons, but with wisdom and patience. We must be better than the species that cast us out." Years passed, then decades. On the surface, life on Earth seemed to continue normally. Cities grew, children were born, people lived and loved and died. The Sentinel stations floating in space became just another part of the sky, like the moon or the stars. But beneath the surface, the great project continued. Admiral Chen Wei-lin died at the age of 97, surrounded by her family and the leaders she had trained. Her last words were simple: "Don't forget, don't forgive, and don't stop building." Her successors carried on her vision. Each generation passed the torch to the next. The project grew larger and more ambitious with each passing year. Children who had never known the stars grew up hearing stories about them. They learned about the beautiful worlds humanity had been forced to abandon. They learned about the alien species who had condemned their ancestors. And they learned about the promise that had been made in that bunker under the Swiss Alps. One day, humanity would return. And when they did, everything would change. Meanwhile, out in the galaxy, life continued as it always had. The Conclave celebrated the successful containment of the human threat. Corvethan was promoted to a position of even greater power within the Vethkari Dominion. He occasionally thought about the strange little species on the quarantined world, but only with amusement. They would die out eventually, he believed. Trapped on a single planet, limited to primitive technology, they would either destroy themselves or simply fade away. He had no idea that every moment of his life was being watched. He did not know that microscopic drones, each smaller than a grain of sand, had spread throughout the galaxy in the first years of the quarantine. Human scientists had designed them before the exile, predicting exactly what would happen. The drones recorded everything, every conversation, every secret meeting, every hidden crime. The Conclave thought they had put humanity in a cage, but the truth was very different. The cage was not for humanity. The cage was for everyone else. And humanity held the key. 100 years after the exile, a young woman named Yuki Tanaka stood in the same bunker where Admiral Chen Wei-lin had first announced Project Prometheus. The bunker had grown since then. It now extended for miles in every direction. A vast underground city filled with laboratories and factories and training facilities. Yuki had just been appointed director of the Prometheus Initiative. She was only 42 years old, young for such a position, but she had proven herself again and again, showing the same fierce determination that had driven the first generation. She looked at the holographic display showing the solar system. The Sentinel stations still glowed red around the edge, but now, hidden behind them, invisible to any alien sensor, was something new. Ships, thousands of them, built in secret over the course of a century. Each one was more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human scientists had not just matched alien technology, they had surpassed it. They had created things that the ancient species of the Conclave could not even imagine. "We are not ready yet," Yuki said to her advisors, "but we are getting closer. Another 200 years, perhaps. Maybe less if we push harder. 200 years. It seemed like forever. But humans had learned patience. They had learned to think in generations, not years. They had learned that some things were worth waiting for. In the darkness of space, the Sentinel stations kept their silent watch. The aliens of the Conclave went about their lives, never suspecting what was happening in the quarantine system. They had forgotten about humanity. They believed the threat was over. They were wrong. In underground cities and hidden shipyards, in laboratories beneath the ocean and factories inside the hollow moon, humanity was preparing, building, growing stronger. Each generation was smarter than the last, enhanced by careful genetic improvements. Each year, new technologies were developed that would have seemed like magic to the aliens who had cast humanity out. The galaxy had tried to bury them. They had no idea that they had simply planted seeds, and one day, those seeds would bloom into something that would change everything that existed. The stars waited in the darkness, and somewhere on a small blue planet, surrounded by weapons that were supposed to keep them trapped forever, 8 billion humans looked up at those stars and made a promise. We will return, we will remember, and we will never be caged again. 340 years had passed since the day humanity was cast out from the stars. In the galaxy beyond the Sentinel line, empires had risen and fallen. Wars had consumed entire star systems. Species had been born and gone extinct. The universe had continued its ancient dance of creation and destruction. And through it all, Earth had been silent. The galactic conclave barely remembered humanity anymore. The quarantine was considered ancient history, a problem solved long ago by wiser generations. Young aliens learned about it in school as an example of successful threat containment. The dangerous species had been locked away, and the galaxy was safer for it. That was the story everyone believed. On Earth, the story was very different. Director Yuki Tanaka had died 230 years ago. Her daughter had taken over the Prometheus initiative, and then her granddaughter, and then others who shared no blood but carried the same flame. The leadership changed, but the mission never did. Every generation built upon the work of the one before, adding new discoveries, new technologies, new dreams to the great project. Now, in the year 2487 by the old Earth calendar, a man named Marcus Webb stood in a laboratory that would have seemed like heaven to scientists of earlier centuries. The lab was located inside an asteroid that had been carefully moved into orbit around Jupiter. From the outside, it looked like any other rock floating in space. Inside, it was a marvel of engineering. Marcus was 73 years old, though he looked no older than 40. The genetic enhancements developed over 3 centuries had extended human lifespans and preserved youth in ways the aliens could never have predicted. His mind was still sharp, his body still strong. He had dedicated his entire life to a single problem, and today, he believed he had finally solved it. "Run the simulation again," he said to his assistant, a young woman named Sarah. Sarah touched a control panel, and the holographic display in the center of the room came to life. It showed a small sphere of light, no larger than a marble. The sphere pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. "Dimensional fold initiated," Sarah announced. "Power levels stable, spatial compression successful. The test object is now occupying a point outside normal space-time." Marcus held his breath. This was the moment. 300 years of research had led to this single test. If it worked, humanity would have a way to travel that no alien sensor could detect. They would be able to move through the galaxy like ghosts, unseen and unstoppable. The marble of light flickered. For a terrible moment, Marcus thought the experiment had failed. Then, suddenly, the light expanded. It became a doorway, a hole in reality itself. Through the doorway, Marcus could see stars that were not the stars of the Sol system. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "We actually did it." Marcus allowed himself to smile. For 60 years, he had worked on this problem. 60 years of failures, of dead ends, of theories that looked perfect on paper but collapsed in practice, and now, finally, success. He immediately sent a message to Earth. Within hours, the news had spread to every hidden facility in the solar system. Humans everywhere celebrated, not with noise and parties, but with quiet satisfaction. They had taken another step toward their goal. They were one step closer to the stars. But dimensional folding was only one piece of the puzzle. Across the solar system, other scientists were making breakthroughs of their own. In a laboratory beneath the ice of Europa, Dr. Amara Okonkwo had created something that should have been impossible. She called it a recursive intelligence engine, though most people simply called it the mind that builds minds. Amara was 112 years old, one of the oldest humans still actively working. Her body was more machine than flesh now, kept alive by technologies that would have seemed like magic to her ancestors. But her mind was still human, still burning with the curiosity that had driven her entire life. She stood before a processing core the size of a small building. Inside that core, something was thinking. Not just thinking, but creating. The artificial intelligence she had built was designing better artificial intelligences, which were then designing even better ones. Each generation was smarter than the last, each cycle bringing new insights and new capabilities. Current iteration count, 4,712, the core announced in a voice that was almost human. Processing speed has increased by a factor of 3 million since initial activation. New theoretical frameworks have been generated in physics, mathematics, and dimensional mechanics. Amara nodded. She had started this process 5 years ago. In that time, the intelligence within the core had advanced human scientific knowledge by 10,000 years. It had solved problems that human scientists had struggled with for centuries. It had created new fields of study that no one had ever imagined, and it was still growing. What is our current understanding of faster-than-light communication? Amara asked. The core hummed for exactly 0.003 seconds. Previous models were based on quantum entanglement and wormhole physics. Current models utilize dimensional resonance, allowing instantaneous communication across any distance without possibility of interception. A working prototype could be constructed within 6 months. Amara smiled. She remembered the old days, before the exile, when human scientists had begged the conclave for scraps of alien knowledge. The aliens had given them basic information, just enough to let humanity stumble into space without really understanding how anything worked. They had treated humans like children who could not be trusted with real power. Now, human science had surpassed anything the aliens possessed, and the aliens had no idea. In another part of the solar system, a different kind of breakthrough was taking place. Dr. Ivan Petrov stood on the surface of Mercury, protected from the sun's deadly radiation by a suit that was more force field than fabric. Before him stretched a landscape of mirrors and collectors, covering thousands of square miles of the planet's surface. Mercury had been transformed over the past century. What was once a dead world of rock and dust was now the greatest power generation facility in human history. But even that was not enough for Ivan. He wanted more. He wanted unlimited power, the kind of energy that could fuel an entire civilization forever. Begin the extraction sequence, he ordered. Deep beneath the surface of Mercury, machines began to move. They reached down into the quantum fabric of space itself, touching the energy that existed in the empty vacuum between atoms. Zero-point energy, the physicists called it, the power that held the universe together. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the readings on Ivan's display began to climb, and climb, and climb, output levels exceeding all projections, his team reported. We're generating more power than the entire solar energy grid combined, and we've barely started. Ivan laughed, a sound of pure joy echoing inside his helmet. Unlimited power. Clean, safe, inexhaustible. With this technology, humanity could build ships that never needed to refuel. They could create weapons that never ran out of ammunition. They could construct habitats that would support billions of people indefinitely. The aliens had left humanity trapped in a single star system, thinking they would slowly starve for resources. Instead, humanity had learned to harvest the very fabric of reality itself. There were no limits anymore, only possibilities. Back on Earth, these breakthroughs were being combined into something greater than the sum of their parts. Supreme Commander James Achebe stood in the war room of the Prometheus Initiative, deep beneath the mountains of what had once been called Tanzania. He was a tall man with dark skin and patient eyes. Like all leaders of the initiative, he had been chosen not for his ambition, but for his wisdom. Humanity could not afford mistakes. Every decision had to be perfect. Around him, holographic displays showed the current state of the solar system. The moon had been hollowed out and converted into a construction facility, building ships at a rate that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Mars was now a world of factories and laboratories, its red surface covered with domes that housed millions of workers. The asteroid belt had been mined almost empty, its resources transformed into the materials needed for the Great Fleet. And what a fleet it was. James expanded one of the displays, showing the ships that were currently being built in the secret shipyards of Luna. There were 12,000 of them, each one a masterpiece of human engineering. Their hulls were made from materials that did not exist in nature, substances created atom by atom in the quantum forges of Mercury. Their engines used dimensional folding to travel instantly from one point to another, leaving no trace that any sensor could detect. Their weapons operated on principles that no alien scientist had ever theorized. These were not the clumsy vessels that humanity had built during their brief time among the stars. These were weapons of a new era, designed by intelligences that thought 1,000,000 times faster than any organic brain. Each ship was worth more than the entire fleet of any alien species. Together, they represented power beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Report on fleet readiness," James ordered. A woman stepped forward. Her name was Chen Li, a direct descendant of the legendary Admiral Chen Wei-lin, who had first conceived the Prometheus Initiative. The Chen family had served in leadership positions for every generation since the exile. It was not a matter of privilege or inheritance. It was simply that they kept producing people who were exactly right for the job. 80% of vessels are complete and operational, Li reported. The remaining 20% will be finished within the next decade. All crews have been trained using virtual reality simulations based on intelligence gathered from the alien species. James nodded. And the intelligence network? Active and expanding. We currently have surveillance drones positioned in every major system of the Galactic Conclave. We have complete maps of their military deployments, their political alliances, and their economic networks. We know more about the Conclave than they know about themselves. This was perhaps humanity's greatest advantage. While the aliens had ignored Earth, believing it to be a primitive cage, humans had been watching everything. The microscopic drones that had been released before the exile had spread across the galaxy like invisible seeds. They recorded every conversation, every movement, every secret. They sent their data back to Earth through dimensional channels that no alien technology could detect. The Conclave thought they were the ones doing the watching. They were wrong. They had always been the ones being watched. "What about the Sketh?" James asked. Lee's expression darkened. The Sketh hegemony was a nightmare that had emerged from the galactic rim 50 years ago. They were not like other species. They were a hive mind, a single consciousness spread across billions of bodies. They consumed everything in their path, absorbing other species into their collective. They did not negotiate or trade or compromise. They simply took. The Sketh continue to expand, Lee said. They have consumed 12 species in the past decade. The Conclave has attempted to organize a defense, but their response has been slow and poorly coordinated. At their current rate of expansion, the Sketh will reach the core systems of the Conclave within the next century. James closed his eyes. For 300 years, humanity had been preparing for the day they would return to the stars. They had imagined many scenarios, many possible futures, but the rise of the Sketh changed everything. The Conclave was dying. The ancient alliance that had cast humanity out was rotting from within. Corruption had spread through every level of their government. Species that had once cooperated now fought each other for scraps of power, and a new threat was consuming them one world at a time, while they argued about who should take responsibility. Part of James felt satisfaction at this. The Conclave deserved to fall. They had treated humanity with contempt, had judged an entire species based on fear and prejudice. Let them face the consequences of their own failures. But another part of him, the part that made him a good leader, saw something else. Out there in the galaxy, billions of innocent beings were suffering. Species that had nothing to do with humanity's exile were being consumed by the Sketh or oppressed by the failing Conclave. Children were dying on worlds that James had never seen, in wars that had nothing to do with the old grudge. He thought about the message that had been passed down through generations of initiative leaders. The words of Admiral Chen Wei-lin, spoken 3 centuries ago. "We must be better than the species that cast us out." Revenge would be easy. Humanity could wait in their hidden empire, watching the galaxy burn, emerging only to pick up the pieces. But that would make them no better than the aliens who had feared and despised them. "We need to accelerate the timeline," James said finally. "The fleet must be ready within 15 years. Lee looked surprised. "That's ambitious, Commander. We would have to increase production by 40%, then increase it. The galaxy is falling apart. When we return, it cannot be as conquerors. It must be as something else." James turned to face the holographic display of the fleet. "We will offer the galaxy a choice. Join us in building something better, or stand aside. Those who have shown cruelty will face justice. But those who are innocent, those who are suffering, We'll find salvation." He paused, looking at the stars that humanity had been denied for so long. "We did not spend 3 centuries building an empire of vengeance. We built an empire of hope, and it is time for that hope to reach beyond our borders." Across the solar system, the message spread. Workers doubled their efforts. Scientists pushed their experiments harder. The great machine of human civilization, hidden for so long in the shadows, began to move faster than ever before. In the factories of Luna, the forges burned day and night. On Mars, training facilities ran constant simulations of every possible battle scenario. In the asteroid belt, the last resources were gathered and shaped into the final ships of the fleet. And in the bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, where the Prometheus initiative had first been born, a new generation of children learned the stories of their ancestors. They learned about Ambassador Elena Vasquez, who had accepted exile with dignity. They learned about Admiral Chen Wei-lin, who had turned despair into determination. They learned about all the scientists and soldiers and leaders who had dedicated their lives to a dream they would never see fulfilled. But these children would see it. They would be the ones to carry humanity back to the stars. They would be the ones to face the aliens who had cast their species out. And they would prove, once and for all, that humanity was not the threat the Conclave had feared. They were something far more dangerous. They were hope. The galaxy did not know it yet, but the age of the Conclave was ending. A new power was rising from the quarantine zone, from the small blue planet that had been written off as a lost cause, and when that power finally revealed itself, nothing in the universe would ever be the same again. The stars waited in the darkness. They had waited for 340 years. Soon, the waiting would be over. Soon, humanity would come home. The galaxy was burning. On the bridge of the Vethkari command ship Eternal Dominion, High Commander Corvethan watched the destruction unfold. His ancestors had ruled these stars for 3 million years. They had crushed countless threats, contained countless dangers, but the Sketh were different from anything they had faced before. The holographic display showed a fleet of Conclave warships engaging a Sketh swarm near the Tertian system. Thousands of vessels on each side, enough firepower to crack planets. The Conclave ships were magnificent, built from technologies refined over millennia. Their weapons could vaporize asteroids with single shots. Their shields could withstand the fury of collapsing stars. None of it mattered. The Sketh did not fight like other species. They did not care about losses. They did not retreat when damaged. They simply kept coming, wave after wave, consuming everything in their path. Their ships were grown rather than built. Organic structures that could repair themselves and reproduce. For every one destroyed, 2 more emerged from the darkness. "The Tertian line is failing," one of Corvethan's officers reported. "Admiral Sethok requests permission to retreat." Corvethan's too-perfect mouth twisted in disgust. Retreat. That was all the Conclave seemed to do anymore. Retreat and argue and blame each other while the enemy grew stronger. "Permission denied," he said. "Tell Sethok to hold the line." He knew it was a death sentence. But the Vethkari could not afford to show weakness. If the other species of the Conclave saw them retreating, they would lose what little authority remained. Better to sacrifice a fleet than to sacrifice prestige. On the display, the Conclave ships continued to fight and die. Corvethan watched with cold eyes. He had been High Commander for 200 years. He had seen countless battles, countless species rise and fall. This was simply more of the same. The strong survived, the weak perished. That was the way of the galaxy. He thought, briefly, about the humans he had helped exile centuries ago. They would be long extinct by now. Surely, trapped on their tiny world, cut off from the stars, they would have destroyed themselves or simply faded away. Just like all the other species the Conclave had contained, Corvethan had no idea how wrong he was. Far across the galaxy, in the Lyran system, a very different scene was unfolding. The Lyrani were a gentle species. They had evolved on a world of vast oceans and floating islands, developing a culture based on trade and cooperation rather than war. For millions of years, they had survived by making themselves useful to more powerful species. They traded rare minerals, crafted beautiful art, and asked for nothing more than to be left alone. Now, they were about to die. A Sketh tendril fleet had entered their system 3 days ago. Not the main force, just a small scouting group. But even a small Sketh force numbered in the billions. Organic ships filled the sky above Lyra, blocking out the stars. On the surface, 20 million Lirani waited for the end. Ambassador Thesia stood on the roof of the Capitol building, watching the approaching doom. She was old for a Lirani. Her scales faded to silver with age. She had served her people for over a century, negotiating trade deals and diplomatic agreements with dozens of species. But there was no negotiating with the Sketh. They did not want trade. They wanted consumption. She had sent messages to the conclave, begging for help. The responses had been polite and empty. The conclave regretted that they could not spare any forces at this time. The Tertian sector was the priority. The Lirani would have to fend for themselves. Thesia knew what that meant. Fend for themselves, die alone, be forgotten. She thought about the humans. Strangely, she had met them once, centuries ago, during the brief period when they had walked among the stars. A young human diplomat had come to Lyra to establish trade relations. His name was Thomas, and he had been so eager, so curious about everything. He had asked 1,000 questions about Lirani culture, Lirani art, Lirani history. He had actually seemed to care. When the exile was announced, Thesia had spoken against it. She had argued that the humans deserved a chance to prove themselves. But her voice was small, and the Vethkari were powerful. The vote had passed, and humanity had been locked away. Now, all these centuries later, Thesia wondered what had happened to Thomas. What had happened to all the humans? Had they survived? Had they found a way to live on their quarantined world? She would never know. In a few hours, she would be dead, and the Lirani would join the long list of species consumed by the Sketh. A light appeared in the sky. Thesia looked up, expecting to see Sketh ships descending to begin the final assault. But the light was wrong. It was not the sickly green of Sketh organic technology. It was silver and blue, clean and sharp, like starlight given form. More lights appeared. 1, then 5, then 15. They emerged from nothing, from empty space, materializing as if they had simply decided to exist. The Sketh ships reacted instantly, turning their weapons toward the newcomers. Beams of organic energy lashed out at the silver lights. The lights did not even slow down. Thesia watched in disbelief as the silver shapes cut through the Sketh fleet like wind through leaves. They moved impossibly fast, changing direction in ways that violated every law of physics. Their weapons fired in perfect coordination, each shot finding its target with absolute precision. Sketh ships exploded by the hundreds, then by the thousands. In 11 minutes, it was over. The Sketh fleet that had come to consume Lyra was gone, destroyed completely. Where billions of organic ships had filled the sky, now there was only emptiness and the gentle glow of the silver newcomers. Thesia's communicator crackled to life. A voice spoke, using the Lirani language perfectly, without accent or hesitation. Ambassador Thesia, this is Commander Sarah Okonjo of the Human Ascendancy. We apologize for the delay in responding. Please do not be afraid. You are safe now. Thesia's hands trembled. Humans. The humans had returned. But how? The quarantine, the sentinel stations, the centuries of isolation. How had they survived? How had they built ships like these? Commander, she managed to say. How? Where did you come from? There was a pause. When Okonjo spoke again, there was warmth in her voice. Real warmth, not the cold politeness of the conclave. We came from a small blue world that was supposed to be a cage. But you cannot cage the human spirit, Ambassador. We are here to help. We remember those who showed us kindness in the dark days before our exile. The Lirani were among the few who spoke for us. We have not forgotten. Thesia felt tears forming in her eyes. 3 centuries ago, she had cast a single vote against humanity's exile. A vote that meant nothing, that changed nothing. But the humans had remembered. What do you want from us? She asked. What is the price of your protection? No price, Okonjo replied. We ask only that you remember us as we remembered you. And if you wish, we will teach you what we have learned. The galaxy is changing, Ambassador. The old order is dying. Something new is being born. If you want, Lyra can be part of it. On the surface of Lyra, millions of beings looked up at the silver ships that had saved them. They did not understand what they were seeing. They did not know the history, the exile, the centuries of preparation, but they knew one thing. They had been abandoned by their allies, and strangers had come to save them. The strangers called themselves humans. After a few hours, The human ships folded away into whatever strange dimension they traveled through. They left behind no troops, no occupation force, no demands. They left only a single message beacon, floating in orbit above Lyra. The beacon contained a simple message in every language known to the Conclave. Humanity remembers those who showed us kindness. We remember those who did not. Within days, the message had spread across the galaxy. The Conclave, already overwhelmed by the Sketh threat, now faced something even more confusing. The humans were back. But these were not the weak, primitive creatures they had exiled. These humans had technology that made the Conclave's most advanced weapons look like children's toys, and they were choosing their battles carefully, appearing out of nowhere to save species that the Conclave had abandoned. Corvithan received the news on his command ship. For the first time in centuries, he felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. "How is this possible?" he demanded. The quarantine was perfect. No ship could have escaped the Sentinel network. His intelligence officers had no answers. The Sentinel stations were still active, still forming an unbroken wall around the Sol system. According to every sensor and every scan, the humans were still trapped on their home world. But clearly, they had found another way. A way that no alien scientist could understand. "Increase surveillance on the quarantine zone," Corvithan ordered. "Divert a fleet to investigate. I want to know how they escaped." But diverting a fleet was easier said than done. Every ship the Conclave had was needed to fight the Sketh. The ancient alliance was stretched to breaking point. And now there was a new threat, one that seemed to appear and disappear at will. Corvithan thought about the human ambassador he had helped exile so long ago, Elena Vasquez. He remembered the way she had accepted the sentence, calm and dignified. He had thought she was broken, accepting defeat. Now he realized she had been hiding something. The humans had known. Somehow, they had known what would happen, and they had been preparing even before the exile. For the first time in his very long life, Corvithan wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Back in the Sol system, the fleet was mobilizing. Supreme Commander James Achebe had given the order, and the greatest military force ever created by any species was moving out of the shadows. 12,000 warships, each one representing centuries of human ingenuity and determination. They gathered in the dark spaces between planets, invisible to any sensor, waiting for their orders. On the flagship Prometheus, named for the initiative that had made all of this possible, James stood with his senior commanders. They had studied the galaxy for centuries, mapping every weakness, every conflict, every opportunity. Now it was time to put that knowledge to use. "Our first priority is to establish safe zones for refugees," James said. "The Sketh are consuming species faster than the Conclave can respond. We need to give the survivors somewhere to go. Our second priority is to continue making contact with species that are sympathetic to our cause. The Lyrani have already sent unofficial messages expressing interest in alliance. There are others, the Korthan, the Thalassians, the Moktai, all species that have suffered under the Conclave's rule. They will be receptive." Commander Sarah Okonjo nodded. She had led the rescue at Lyra, and she was proud of what her team had accomplished. But she knew it was only the beginning. "What about the Vethkari?" she asked. "They will come for us eventually. They cannot allow the humans they exiled to return and challenge their power." James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Let them come. We have been preparing for the Vethkari for 300 years. We know every ship in their fleet, every base in their empire, every secret they have tried to hide. When the time comes, we will give them exactly what they gave us." "And what is that?" "A judgment, a sentence, and exile." The weeks that followed were chaotic, glorious, and terrifying all at once. Human ships appeared across the galaxy, always in places where the Conclave had failed. They rescued species that were about to be consumed by the Sketh. They delivered supplies to worlds that were starving because trade routes had been disrupted. They offered medical care to populations suffering from diseases that the Conclave had never bothered to cure. And always, they left the same message: humanity remembers. The psychological impact was devastating. For millions of years, the Conclave had been the only power in the galaxy. Species that wanted to survive had no choice but to submit to its rules. But now there was an alternative. A power that did not demand submission. A power that helped without asking for anything in return. One by one, species began to reach out to the humans. Some were curious. Some were desperate. Some simply wanted to know how the impossible had been achieved. How had a species locked away on a single planet for 3 centuries emerged as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy? Human diplomats, trained in the traditions established by Elena Vasquez herself, met with each species individually. They explained what had happened. They described the exile, the quarantine, the centuries of secret development. They talked about the unity that had emerged from shared humiliation, and the determination that had been born from collective spite. We were told we were inferior, one diplomat explained to a gathering of Korthan leaders. Every one of us, every human being on Earth was told that they were not good enough to walk among the stars, and so we decided to prove them wrong, not through war, not through conquest, but by becoming something better than they could imagine. The Korthan, a species of explorers who had been punished centuries ago for discovering technologies the Vethkari wanted to suppress, understood immediately. They knew what it felt like to be crushed by the powerful, and they recognized the fire in the human diplomat's eyes. You want to replace the conclave, the Korthan leader said. You want to become the new power in the galaxy. The diplomat shook her head. No, we don't want to replace the conclave. We want to end the very idea of a conclave. The strong should not rule the weak. The ancient should not suppress the young. Every species deserves the chance to grow and learn and reach for the stars. We want to build a galaxy where that is possible. And the Vethkari, the Ordassians, the others who have benefited from the old order, they will face justice for their crimes. Not vengeance, but justice. There is a difference. Vengeance destroys. Justice heals. Across the galaxy, the message spread. The humans were offering something that had never existed before. A chance for every species to be truly free, not free in name only, while still living under the shadow of ancient powers, but free in reality, with the knowledge and technology to determine their own destiny. Some species rejected the offer. They had grown comfortable under the conclave's rule, or they were afraid of what change might bring. But many accepted. 800 species, in the first months alone, declared their support for the new human ascendancy. They did not know exactly what they were joining, but they knew it was better than what they were leaving behind. On his command ship, Corvithan watched his empire crumble. 3 million years of Vethkari dominance, undone by a species he had dismissed as primitive animals. He raged against the injustice of it. He demanded that his admirals find a way to strike back, but his admirals had nothing to offer. The humans could not be found. Their ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Every ambush failed. Every trap was avoided. It was as if the humans knew exactly what the Vethkari were planning before they planned it. They did. Of course. The microscopic drones that had been watching the galaxy for centuries were still watching. Every order Corvithan gave was transmitted to human intelligence within minutes. Every movement of his fleets was tracked and analyzed. The Vethkari had no secrets anymore. Finally, after months of failed attempts, Corvithan made a decision. If he could not defeat the humans in battle, he would destroy them at their source. He would gather every ship the Vethkari Dominion possessed and strike directly at Earth. 10,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Every vessel would be armed with weapons designed to crack planets. They would break through the Sentinel line, descend upon the human homeworld, and burn it to ash. It was a desperate plan, born of fear and rage. But Corvithan had no other options. The galaxy was slipping away from him, and only a decisive blow could turn the tide. He gave the order, and the great fleet began to move. On Earth, in the war room of the Prometheus Initiative, James Achebe watched the fleet gathering. His intelligence officers had been tracking it for weeks. He knew exactly how many ships were coming, exactly what weapons they carried, exactly what tactics they would use. He smiled. "Let them come," he said. "It's time to end this." The stars waited in the darkness, as they always did. But now, they were waiting for something specific. They were waiting for the final battle between the old order and the new. The battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy itself. And hidden in the shadows of the Sol system, 12,000 human warships powered up their weapons and prepared to welcome the enemy home. The Vethkari Grand Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 10,000 warships, arranged in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. High Commander Corvithan stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the quarantine zone grow larger on his display. The sentinel stations that had imprisoned humanity for 3 centuries still floated in their ancient orbits. Red lights blinked on their surfaces, showing that they were still active, still ready to destroy any human vessel that tried to escape. For a moment, Corvathon felt a surge of confidence. Perhaps the humans had not escaped at all. Perhaps the mysterious ships appearing across the galaxy were something else entirely. Then the first scan results came back. "Commander," his tactical officer said, his voice uncertain. "There is something wrong with the sensor data." "Explain." "The quarantine zone appears empty. No ships, no stations, nothing but the Sentinel network. But our long-range scanners are detecting energy signatures from within the system. Massive energy signatures. More power than our entire fleet combined." Corvathon frowned. "That's impossible." "Show me." The holographic display shifted to show the Sol system. 8 planets, 1 star, billions of asteroids. Everything looked exactly as it had 3 centuries ago. But then the tactical officer adjusted the filters, and the true picture emerged. The energy signatures were everywhere. Hidden inside asteroids, buried beneath the surfaces of moons, concealed in the darkness between planets. Whatever the humans had been building for 300 years, it was vast beyond comprehension. "It's a trap," someone whispered. "This whole system is a trap." Corvathon's 2 perfect teeth ground together. Of course it was a trap. The humans had been preparing for this moment since the day of their exile. Every decision he had made, every fleet he had assembled, every plan he had created, they had known about it all. They had been waiting for him to come to them, but he could not retreat. The entire galaxy was watching. If the Veth-Kari Grand Fleet ran away from a species they had once dismissed as primitive, their authority would collapse completely. There would be no recovering from such a disgrace. "All ships, advance," Corvathon ordered. "Battle formation. Destroy anything that moves." The fleet moved forward, passing the Sentinel line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Sentinel stations powered down, their red lights fading to darkness. They had been deactivated. The prison that had held humanity for 3 centuries was no longer functioning. "Commander, we are being hailed." "From where?" "From everywhere. Every frequency, every channel. The signal is coming from the entire system." Corvathon hesitated. Part of him wanted to ignore the signal, to press the attack immediately. But another part of him, the part that had survived 3 million years of galactic politics, understood that this moment was significant. The humans wanted to speak. Perhaps they wanted to surrender. Perhaps they wanted to negotiate. "Open the channel." The holographic display flickered, and a face appeared. A human face, male, with dark skin and patient eyes. He wore a simple uniform, no medals or decorations. He looked calm, too calm. "High Commander Corvathon," the human said. "I am James Achebe, Supreme Commander of the Human Ascendancy. Welcome to our home." "Your home is about to be destroyed," Corvathon replied. "You have interfered with the affairs of the Galactic Conclave. You have attacked Conclave vessels. You have encouraged treason among protected species. The punishment for these crimes is annihilation." Achebe nodded, as if Corvathon had said something perfectly reasonable. "I understand. You have brought 10,000 ships to enforce that punishment. It is an impressive fleet. Truly, it is. But before you begin, I wonder if you would be interested in seeing what you are attacking." Before Corvathon could respond, the display changed. The hidden energy signatures became visible. Ships emerged from the darkness between planets, folding out of dimensional spaces that should not have existed. They rose from the asteroids and the moons and the rings of Saturn. They came from everywhere, appearing like stars being born. 12,000 human warships, each one larger than the largest vessel in the Veth-Kari fleet. Each one glowing with power that made the ancient conclave technology look primitive by comparison. They surrounded the Veth-Kari fleet like a net closing around fish. "This is the human ascendancy," Achebe said. "We have been building for 340 years. Every insult you gave us, we converted into determination. Every restriction you placed on us, we transformed into innovation. You tried to cage us, and instead you gave us time. Time to think, time to prepare, time to become something you could never have imagined." Corvathon stared at the display. His fleet was completely outmatched. He had brought the greatest armada in Veth-Kari history, and it was surrounded by a force that could destroy it in minutes. "You cannot win," Achebe continued. But we do not want to destroy you. Not like this. If you attack, we will defend ourselves. Your fleet will be annihilated, and you will be responsible for the deaths of millions of Vethkari warriors. Or you can stand down, return to Conclave space. Tell them what you have seen here. The choice is yours. The bridge of Corvethon's flagship was silent. Every officer, every crew member, stood frozen. They were waiting for their commander's decision. Attack and die, or retreat and live. Corvethon's hands clenched into fists. He had never retreated from anything. He had spent his entire life crushing those who opposed the Vethkari. The idea of running away from these creatures, these primitive humans he had helped exile, was almost unbearable, but he was not a fool. Pride was one thing, suicide was another. Stand down, he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. All ships, stand down. We are withdrawing. The Vethkari fleet turned and fled. 10,000 warships, the pride of an empire that had ruled for 3 million years, ran away from a species that had been imprisoned on a single planet for less than 4 centuries. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. The Galactic Conclave, already weakened by the Sketh invasion and internal conflicts, fell into chaos. Emergency sessions were called. Accusations flew between species. Some blamed the Vethkari for provoking the humans. Others blamed the original tribunal that had ordered the exile. A few tried to pretend that nothing had changed, that the humans were still a minor threat that could be dealt with later, but everyone knew the truth. The old order was dying. Something new was being born. 3 days after the Vethkari retreat, a single human ship appeared at the heart of Conclave space. It materialized without warning, without any sensor detecting its approach. It simply appeared, as if it had always been there. The ship was named Prometheus Rising, and it was the largest vessel anyone had ever seen, 3 kilometers long, built from materials that seemed to glow with inner light. It hung in space before the great Conclave station, where the original exile had been decreed. The Conclave had no choice but to receive the human delegation. Refusing would have been pointless. The humans could clearly go wherever they wanted. High Ambassador David Chen walked into the great chamber where his ancestor Elena Vasquez had accepted humanity's sentence so long ago. He was tall and composed, with the same calm dignity that had characterized human diplomats throughout the exile. Behind him came a small group of aides, each one carrying a data tablet. The chamber was full. Representatives from thousands of species floated on their platforms, watching the human enter. Some looked afraid, some looked curious. A few, from species that had already allied with the human ascendancy, looked almost smug. Chen took his position at the center of the chamber, exactly where Elena had stood 3 centuries ago. He looked up at the assembled aliens and smiled. "Thank you for receiving me," he said. His voice was clear and strong. "I know this is unexpected. When my ancestor stood in this place, she accepted a sentence of exile. You believed you were protecting the galaxy from a dangerous species. You believed you were doing the right thing." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You were wrong." The display behind Chen came to life. Images began to appear. Videos, documents, records that had been gathered by human intelligence drones over 3 centuries. This is the truth about the Galactic Conclave, the truth that has been hidden for millions of years. The first images showed the Vethkari Dominion, not the public face they presented to the galaxy, but the reality. Slave ships carrying millions of beings from conquered worlds, processing facilities where lesser species were harvested for biological materials, genetic experiments that treated sentient beings as raw materials. The Vethkari have committed genocide against 17 species in the last 10,000 years. Not conquest, not war, genocide, complete extermination. The records were destroyed, but we found them. We found everything. The images shifted. Now they showed the Ordassian collective, the crystalline beings who claimed to remember the birth of stars. They had presented themselves as wise and ancient, beyond petty concerns like politics or power. The truth was different. The Ordassians have been manipulating conclave elections for 600,000 years. Every major decision, every policy, every war has been influenced by their agents. They do not seek domination openly. They prefer to control from the shadows. More images, more species, more crimes. The conclave was not what it claimed to be. It was not an alliance of equals working together for the common good. It was a power structure designed to benefit the ancient species at the expense of everyone else. Species that grew too strong were contained. Species that discovered inconvenient truths were eliminated. Species that asked too many questions were exiled. Humanity was not the first species to be quarantined, Chen said. We found records of 12 others. All of them were destroyed quietly, generations after their exile, when the galaxy had forgotten about them. The Vethkari were simply waiting for us to die out naturally. When we didn't, they planned to finish the job. The chamber was in chaos. Species were shouting at each other, demanding explanations, accusing their neighbors of participation in the crimes being revealed. The Vethkari representatives had disappeared from their platform, fleeing the station. The Ordashians sat in stony silence, their crystalline forms revealing nothing. Chen waited for the noise to die down. I do not tell you these things to inspire hatred, he continued. I tell you because the truth matters. You have a right to know what has been done in your name, and you have a right to decide what happens next. The display changed one more time. Now it showed something new. Ships, stations, worlds, the infrastructure of the human ascendancy, laid bare for all to see. For 340 years, we have been building, not just ships and weapons, but knowledge, technologies that can feed entire planets, medical treatments that can cure any disease, energy systems that can power civilizations forever. We have developed all of this in isolation, because we had no choice. But now we have a choice, and we choose to share. Chen's voice rose, filling the chamber. The human ascendancy offers a new future to every species willing to embrace it. Join us, and you will have access to everything we have created, not as subjects, but as equals, not through conquest, but through cooperation. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We want to free it. What about the Vethkari? Someone called out. What about the Ordashians? What about all those who profited from the old order? Chen's expression hardened. They will face justice, not vengeance. Justice. We will establish tribunals to investigate the crimes that have been committed. Those who are guilty will be punished. Those who are innocent will be welcomed into the new order. But no one will be harmed without proof. No one will be condemned without trial. That is what separates us from the conclave. In the hours that followed, the galactic conclave collapsed. It did not happen all at once. There was no single moment when the old order ended and the new one began. But the process, once started, could not be stopped. Species that had been oppressed for millennia declared their independence. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Vethkari were open to everyone. Secrets that had been kept for millions of years were finally revealed. 800 species had already allied with humanity before Chen's speech. Within weeks, that number doubled, then tripled. Species that had fought each other for generations found common ground under human mediation. Ancient grudges were set aside in favor of new cooperation. The Vethkari Dominion attempted one final resistance. Corvethon gathered what remained of his fleet, survivors of the humiliation at Sol combined with ships from loyal vassal species. They launched a preemptive strike against Earth, hoping to destroy the human homeworld, while the Ascendancy was busy with diplomacy. The human defense grid destroyed them in 6 hours. The battle, if it could be called that, was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species watched as the mightiest fleet ever assembled by the ancient powers was reduced to dust. Human weapons operated on principles that no alien scientist understood. Human ships moved in ways that violated every known law of physics. Human tactics were coordinated with perfect precision, every vessel knowing exactly where to be and what to do. Not a single alien ship reached the orbit of Mars. Corvethon survived. Somehow, his flagship was crippled but not destroyed, and human rescue vessels pulled him from the wreckage. He expected to be killed, or at least tortured for information. Instead, he was treated with dignity. His wounds were healed. He was given comfortable quarters and regular meals. And then, the trials began. The human ascendancy had promised justice, and justice was what they delivered. Tribunals were established to investigate the crimes of the old order. Witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. Every accused was given the opportunity to defend themselves. Corvethon was charged with 17 counts of genocide, 900 counts of enslavement, and countless lesser crimes. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Records he had thought destroyed, testimony from survivors he had believed dead, his own words, recorded by drones he had never known were watching. The tribunal found him guilty. His sentence was exile, not to a prison planet, but to a small moon at the edge of the galaxy. He would live out his remaining years in comfort, but alone. He would never again hold power. He would never again command a fleet. He would be forgotten, just as he had tried to make humanity forgotten. As the guards led him away, Corvithon finally understood what had happened. The humans had not defeated the Conclave through superior technology, though their technology was indeed superior. They had not won through military strength, though their military was indeed strong. They had won because they had been patient. They had turned their rage into determination, their humiliation into motivation. They had spent 3 centuries becoming something better than their enemies, and now they were offering that gift to the galaxy. In the weeks and months that followed, the transformation accelerated. Human technology spread across the stars like light spreading through darkness. Worlds that had known only scarcity suddenly had unlimited energy. Civilizations that had warred for millennia found common ground under human arbitration. Disease, hunger, and poverty began to disappear. The human ascendancy did not conquer the galaxy. They did not need to. They simply offered a better way, and the galaxy accepted. Ambassador David Chen stood on the observation deck of Prometheus Rising, watching a fleet of alien ships pass by. They were Corthan vessels, on their way to receive new technologies that would allow them to explore the universe without limit. In another part of the galaxy, Lirani traders were using human dimensional folding to reach markets that had been closed to them for millennia. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, human and alien scientists were working together to solve problems that had seemed impossible just a few years ago. His communicator chimed. A message from Earth, from the memorial that had been built at the site of the old Prometheus Initiative bunker. Ambassador Chen, we thought you should know. Today marks exactly 350 years since the day of exile. The memorial service is about to begin. Your grandmother left a message for this occasion. Would you like to hear it? Chen closed his eyes. His grandmother had been one of the last people alive who remembered the days before the quarantine. She had died 20 years ago, but she had recorded messages for important milestones she knew she would not live to see. Play it. A voice came through the communicator. Old and tired, but still strong. My dear ones, if you are hearing this, then we have succeeded. We have returned to the stars. I will not pretend to know what the galaxy looks like now. I hope it is better than the one I knew. I hope you have found a way to make something good out of all the pain and loss and waiting. But most of all, I hope you remember why we began this journey. Not for revenge, not for power, but because we believed in something. We believed that humanity had something to offer the universe. We believed that no species had the right to decide the fate of another. We believed that the strong should lift up the weak, not crush them. If you have kept that belief alive, then everything we sacrificed was worth it. And if you have not, then all we built was for nothing. I love you all. Make me proud. The message ended. Chen stood in silence for a long moment, looking at the stars that his ancestors had been denied for so long. They had made it. They had kept the faith. And now, finally, the galaxy was beginning to understand what humanity really was. Not a threat, not a danger, but a promise that tomorrow could always be better than today. The old galaxy died quietly, like a candle burning out at dawn. No one marked the exact moment when the galactic conclave ceased to exist. There was no final vote, no dramatic declaration. The ancient alliance simply faded away, replaced by something new, something better. Chancellor James Achebe, former Supreme Commander of the Human Ascendancy, stood on the balcony of the new Galactic Assembly Hall. The building had been constructed on neutral ground, a small moon that had belonged to no species before this. Its design incorporated elements from thousands of cultures, a living symbol of the unity that was slowly spreading across the stars. Below him, the first session of the new Galactic Assembly was taking place. Representatives from over 3,000 species sat together, debating and discussing and sometimes arguing. It was messy. It was slow. It was democracy. Real democracy. Applied to an entire galaxy for the first time in history. James was 237 years old. Human genetic engineering had extended lifespans far beyond what his ancestors could have imagined. He had watched the transformation of the galaxy with his own eyes. From the first rescue missions to this moment, And he was tired. Not in body, but in spirit. He had carried the burden of leadership for too long. "You look thoughtful." The voice came from behind him. He turned to find Ambassador Thesia of the Lirani approaching on her floating platform. She was ancient by Lirani standards. Nearly 400 years old, her scales had faded to pure white, and her movements were slow. But her eyes were still sharp. "I am thinking about the past," James admitted. "About all the people who worked and sacrificed so that this moment could happen. Most of them never saw it. They died believing in something they could only imagine." Thesia moved her platform closer. "I remember your people, before the exile. I met some of the first human diplomats who came to Lyra. They were so young, so eager. They wanted to learn everything about us. And what did you think of them?" "I thought they were dangerous." Thesia made a sound that might have been laughter. "Not in the way the Vethkari feared. Dangerous because they made us question things we had accepted for millions of years. They asked why the conclave worked the way it did. They asked who benefited from the old systems. They made us uncomfortable." James nodded. "That is what the conclave really feared, I think. Not our military potential or our rate of reproduction. They feared our questions. They feared that we would inspire others to ask the same things. They were right to fear it. Look at what your questions have created." Below them, a heated debate was taking place. A species called the Moktai was arguing with the Ordashians about trade regulations. In the old conclave, the Ordashians would have simply imposed their will. Now, they had to convince and compromise like everyone else. It was frustrating for them. It was liberating for everyone else. "How are the reconstruction efforts?" James asked. "The former Sketh territories?" "Proceeding well. The hegemony has been pushed back to their home cluster. But the worlds they consumed will take generations to recover. Human medical technology is helping. Many species that were thought extinct have been found in Sketh storage facilities, their genetic material preserved for later consumption. We are bringing them back." James closed his eyes. The victory over the Sketh had been hard-won. The hive mind had resisted every attempt at negotiation, every offer of peace. In the end, the human ascendancy had been forced to use technologies they had hoped to keep secret, weapons that could destroy organic minds while leaving bodies intact. The Sketh collective had screamed as it died, billions of voices crying out in confusion and pain. It had been necessary. The Sketh would have consumed the entire galaxy if left unchecked, but necessity did not make it any less terrible. "Sometimes I wonder if we are any better than the Conclave," James said quietly. "We have weapons they could never have imagined, power they could never have matched. What prevents us from becoming what we replaced?" Thesia considered the question carefully. "I have watched your species for centuries now. I have seen humans make mistakes. I have seen them fail. But I have also seen something the Conclave never had. I have seen you doubt yourselves. The Vethkari never asked if they were doing the right thing. They assumed they were always right, simply because they were powerful. But your people ask. You question. You worry. That is what makes you different. Doubt is not a strategy for governing a galaxy. No. But it is a strategy for governing it well." The session below was ending for the day. Species were filing out, returning to their ships and diplomatic quarters. Tomorrow, they would argue again. And the day after. And the day after that. It would take years, maybe centuries, to work out all the details of the new order. But it was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, it was happening. James turned to leave, but Thesia called after him. "Chancellor, there is something I have never asked you. Something I have wondered about for many years." "Yes?" "When you returned to the galaxy, you saved my world first. The Lirani, a species of minor importance, a species that had contributed nothing to your survival. Of all the battles you could have fought, you chose to rescue us. Why?" James smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had allowed himself in weeks. "Because you spoke for us. 300 years ago, when the tribunal condemned humanity to exile, the Lirani were one of the few species that voted against it. You tried to help us, even though it gained you nothing. We remembered that. We remembered kindness." Thesia was silent for a long moment. Then she bowed her head, a gesture of deep respect in Lirani culture. "Then we are all very fortunate that humans have long memories." The years passed. Then the decades. Then the centuries. The new galactic assembly grew stronger with each passing generation. Conflicts that would have sparked wars under the old system were resolved through negotiation and compromise. Trade flourished across the stars. Species that had been enemies for millennia found common ground. The scars left by the conclave and the Sketh slowly began to heal. Human technology spread throughout the galaxy, but the humans themselves did not try to dominate. They served as mediators, teachers, and sometimes peacekeepers. When disputes grew too heated, human arbitrators would step in, offering solutions that no other species had considered. When diseases threatened populations, human medical teams arrived with cures. When worlds faced disaster, human rescue ships were always first on the scene. But the humans also learned. They discovered that they did not have all the answers. Other species had wisdom to offer, perspectives that humans had never considered. The arrogant assumption that humanity alone could save the galaxy was replaced by a more humble understanding. They were part of something larger. They were one voice in a chorus, not the only singer. On Earth, the sentinel stations that had once imprisoned humanity were converted into museums. Children of 100 species visited the small blue planet to learn about the creatures who had been cast out and who had responded by becoming the architects of a new era. They walked through the ruins of the old cities, preserved exactly as they had been during the exile. They visited the underground bunkers where the Prometheus Initiative had been born. They stood on the observation decks and looked up at the stars that humanity had been denied for so long. The guides who led these tours always ended with the same message. Not a message of triumph or superiority. A message of hope. The humans were told they were not good enough. The guides would say. They were told they did not deserve the stars. And for 300 years, they lived in a cage, watched by weapons that would have destroyed them if they tried to escape. But they did not give up. They did not accept the judgment that had been passed on them. They worked together, built together, dreamed together, and in the end, they proved that the only limits that truly bind us are the limits we accept. 1,000 years after the exile, a great celebration was held across the galaxy. Every species that had joined the new assembly participated. Ships gathered from every corner of known space. Lights blazed on 10 million worlds. Music played in frequencies that spanned the entire electromagnetic spectrum. At the center of it all, on the observation deck of a station that orbited Earth, a small group of humans gathered. They were the descendants of the original Prometheus Initiative, the great-great-grandchildren of the men and women who had refused to accept defeat. They had come to remember. Among them was a young woman named Elena Chen Vasquez. She was 17 years old, barely an adult by human standards, but she had been chosen to speak on behalf of her generation, to carry the message forward to those who would come after. She stepped up to the podium and looked out at the gathered crowd. Humans and aliens stood together, united in a way that would have seemed impossible to her ancestors. The stars shone through the transparent dome above, the same stars that had been denied to humanity for so long. 1,000 years ago, she began. My ancestors were told they did not matter. They were cast out from the community of civilized species, locked away on this single world, expected to fade into nothing. The galaxy forgot about them. The powerful assumed they had won. She paused, looking at the diverse faces before her, but my ancestors did not forget. They remembered the insult. They remembered the injustice, and they decided to prove that the judgment was wrong. Not through violence, though they built weapons, not through conquest, though they could have conquered. They proved it by becoming something better than what they had been. They took their anger and transformed it into determination. They took their pain and used it to fuel their dreams. Some people say we won because of our technology. That is partly true. Our ships are faster than anyone else's. Our weapons are more powerful. Our science is more advanced. But technology is not what saved us. What saved us was unity. For the first time in human history, we stopped fighting each other. We stopped seeing ourselves as separate nations, separate peoples, separate tribes. We became one species, one family, one dream. And that is the message I want to leave with you today. Not that humans are special, not that we deserve to rule, or to lead, or to be praised, but that unity is possible. That creatures who have spent their entire history fighting each other can learn to work together. That the differences between us are smaller than the things we share. She gestured at the stars above. The galaxy was ruled by fear for millions of years. Species that grew too strong were crushed. Species that asked too many questions were silenced. The powerful used their power to stay powerful, and everyone else suffered. My ancestors changed that, not by becoming the new tyrants, but by showing that there was another way. A way where the strong lift up the weak instead of crushing them. A way where knowledge is shared instead of hoarded. A way where every species, no matter how young or how small, has a voice. This is not the end of the story. It is barely the beginning. 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, the galaxy will face challenges we cannot imagine. But as long as we remember what we learned during the exile, as long as we keep that flame of unity alive, we will be able to face whatever comes. They cast us out. They thought they were burying a threat, but they were planting seeds, and those seeds have grown into something beautiful, something that belongs to all of us, human and alien alike. Elena stepped back from the podium. For a moment, there was silence. Then the applause began. It came from every species, every world, every being who had gathered to celebrate this moment. It rolled across the galaxy like thunder, a sound of joy and gratitude and hope. In the back of the crowd, an old human stood watching. His name was Thomas Achebe, a descendant of the legendary Chancellor. He was 312 years old, one of the oldest humans still alive. He had seen the transformation with his own eyes. From the last days of the exile to this moment of celebration, he thought about his ancestors, about Admiral Chen Wei-lin, who had first conceived the Prometheus Initiative, about Ambassador Elena Vasquez, who had accepted exile with dignity, about Supreme Commander James Achebe, who had led humanity back to the stars, about all the unnamed millions who had worked and sacrificed and dreamed. They had been told they were not good enough. They had been cast out, forgotten, written off as a failed experiment, and they had responded by changing everything. Thomas smiled. It was not a smile of triumph or superiority. It was a smile of quiet satisfaction. The kind of smile you might give when you finish a task that seemed impossible, when you prove that the doubters were wrong. The humans had been cast out. A hidden empire had risen from Earth, and the galaxy would never be the same again. In the darkness of space, the stars continued to burn. They had burned for billions of years before humanity existed, and they would burn for billions more after humanity was gone. But for this moment, for this brief flicker of cosmic time, the stars were not just lights in the darkness. They were promises. Promises that tomorrow could always be better than today. Promises that unity was stronger than division. Promises that even the smallest species, locked away on a tiny blue world, could change the fate of the universe. The humans had kept those promises, and now, together with their allies from across the galaxy, they were writing a new chapter in the story of existence. A chapter that had no ending, because the best stories never really end. They just keep growing, generation after generation, species after species, star after star. The future stretched out before them, vast and unknown, and humanity faced it the same way they had always faced their challenges, together.